Hello, friends. This is your host Kushbu Raleigh. Welcome to Voice of the World. Today we have amongst us Mr. Sridhar Chityala, a renowned geopolitical economist. He has been with us and provided his expert opinion on multiple topics related to current affairs. Thank you so much, Sridhar sir, for giving us your time always. So today we would like to pick your brains on the topic which has been in news quite a lot lately, South China Sea. First of all, we would like to know what is the issue in South China Sea, how did it originate, and also the stand of the current government, Mr. Trump, on that particular issue, and also the stand of multiple countries which are involved and are trying to have a claim in those disputed waters.
One of the most disputed territories in the global world of persistent, constant, and pervasive issues about global boundaries is South China Sea. The amazing thing about South China Sea is it is a contention between one sovereign state, which is China, with several sovereign states within the region. So we are talking about South China Sea, which is an area stuck between Taiwan, China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and Philippines. Just let's look at the economic data as it relates to this region. Estimates are the annual trade is that passes through the South China Sea is around 3.6 to 4 trillion by estimates. It roughly accounts for 1/3 of the global maritime trade. 1/3. Second, 80% of Chinese energy imports and 40% of China's total trade passes through South China Sea. Close to 40% of the natural gas, which is used by a number of countries in the region, passes through the same area. So when you look at trade, when you look at energy, it naturally leads to the third component, which is security. Until China reared its head, life was quite normal and the dispute prevailed and was there, but people were hanging around and dealing with the issues. China was relatively a small nation at that point of time. We're talking about 70s and early 80s. This dispute is now about 40 years old. The China's rise of economic power has brought with it the belligerents to control various functional points that constitute its kind of strategic interests. The constitution of the perception of its strategic interests must also be sympathetic and cognizant of sentiments of the other nations. That's how trade functions. That's how security operates. And that's how the most important element, energy, both consumer as well as commercial fuel, is managed. there is this fine 9 point line which commences from Taiwan and Manila, makes its way to Manila in the east, and that part is called Senkaku Islands in Taiwan and Scarborough Shoal near Manila. It winds its way, and stuck in between is the Spratly Islands. Then it comes around to Brunei, then makes its shape around Malaysia and goes to Vietnam, and then finally into right at the tip of China border with Vietnam near Hanoi. Also lumped in the middle is Hong Kong. So Scarborough Shoal is Philippines. Paracel Islands is Vietnam. And then you have Malaysia, Brunei. Indonesia has been complaining because one of the border points, this 9 point artificial line, passes through the Indonesian waters, which roughly fetches close to 65% of fisheries and other sea-bearing food. And often the Indonesian sailors and fishermen are caught in skirmishes with the Chinese PLA. As it ascended itself into an economic power, China began to build, whenever US was on the wane, around these reefs, artificial islands, and these islands became their PLA's strategic naval and air bases. Most of these islands are naval and air bases. This was contested in the international court, and the international court ruled the claims by China in South China Sea is illegal. The ruling that was made was not accepted by China, and there are no mechanisms. There are no mechanisms that allow the enforcement. No mechanisms that allow enforcement. So you have an international ruling, but the dispute continues. So many of these reefs that constitute fulcrum points around the Spratly Islands, which are in the center of the South China Sea, that includes Paracel Islands, Scarborough Shoal, Gulf of Tonkin, Indonesian Natuna Islands, all have become problem points in terms of security, overlapping boundaries, shipping lanes, making it one hot potato. In the South China Sea, you also have the naval bases, which broadly is the ASEAN US allies from Japan, Singapore, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, though Malaysia has tended to be passive, and Indonesia, and Taiwan, and Korea. So you can kind of imagine these persistent tensions that prevail. There's also fears that China as a nation given the volume of trade that flows through, can effectively control two important elements that define the national security of these countries, which is trade, which affects the people, and second, they may start imposing tariffs and tolls and threaten small countries. There's no mechanism. They may even dictate that all have to buy from China because of its economic power and its military power. So at stake is not just the mere independence of maritime lanes and access to the respective islands for their own sovereignty, for the fishermen and other people to transact business amongst themselves and also allow the expansion of the energy and gas trade, because Vietnam is natural gas. It's also said that these reefs are great source of fossil fuel, yet to be explored and commercialized. US has been acting as a deterrent mechanism in helping these nations combat China. Japan in recent times has enhanced its naval power, and supporting United States is Japan. To some extent, Korea as well has come into the fray. Unless and until there is an amicable agreement reached and some kind of no war pact or no interference pact is reached between China and the participating nations in that particular shelf, this problem will continue to persist. There's no immediate viable solution because China is unwilling to bend. Unless there's a weakening of the Chinese regime, one can continue to expect skirmishes. The economic data, the energy data, makes it fairly self-evident as to why these issues are pivotal to each of these nations in terms of preserving their own sovereignty and having control over the pieces of boundary or maritime waters for their own interest. I don't believe that this is a tribunal, United Nations, some kind of ASEAN treaty is going to be feasible because China is the biggest gorilla at the table. Many of the nations are small economies. China dispenses with any of these nations at its will. It can impose, put money, play one against the other, which typically Malaysia gets itself into bed with China. On occasions, Cambodia, which is adjacent to Vietnam, also toes the line of the Chinese. But rest of the nations are fairly united in preserving their sovereignty. Singapore, Brunei, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan. Of course, Hong Kong is no longer independent, but given a chance, it would, because Hong Kong is one of the big trading venues. So that's the centerpiece of the South China issue, which is China imposing its will, trying to control the destiny, effectively, eventually, to be the master of the maritime lanes and exert authority over the countries with vast number of illegal air bases that it is building. Soon, it may also stake claim to some of the resources, underwater resources of natural gas as well as shale. This in about sums up. And there's annual meetings, there's annual rituals, there is annual bickerings, there's annual skirmishes. There are even these gigantic carriers trying to bump into each other in those waters. Then you go into the Indo-Pacific Sea, you will bring Japan and Russia into the potpourri. As is often said, is the trade and economy, or the economic data, or the economic value that often is the centerpiece of dispute, and the dispute takes an alarming proportion when you have asymmetric power resting with one nation relative to the small nations, where you need a superpower like United States. The formation of Quad, which encompasses India, Australia, Japan, and United States, is slowly acquiring a mandate from Pacific on one side to Indian Ocean on the other side, including the South China Sea, to be the maritime cop, using their respective navies to deter China. So it is going to be a balancing game versus a game of amicable settlement and resolution. That, in about, sums up South China problem.